Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Resume, Charting a New Course for HR. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have any questions or technical concerns, please use the Q&A module on your screen. You can resize and minimize the different modules on your screen by using the options in the top right corner of each module. This event is being recorded and can be watched later on demand using the same link. Attendees will receive the recording of today's event. Look for that email within 24 hours post-event. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A module throughout the event for our speakers to address. You can also use the reaction module in the menu at the bottom to relay items you may like or want to express an emotion to. And now I will pass the stage to Rebecca Warren, Director, Talent Center Transformation at Eightfold AI.
Thank you very much. Hey, coming to you live from Minnesota and Arizona all at the same time. It's the Rebecca and Jenny show. Just kidding. We are going to be spending some time talking about what it means to chart a new course for HR, looking beyond the resume. So I will be the slide flipper. So we're going to go to the next slide. We've got some agenda items here. We'll walk you through the rise and fail of the resume, talk about mobility misses and messes, what is the urgency for change. We'll talk about skills, success stories, and then we'll give you some takeaways. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat. If we don't get to them during the presentation, we will follow up with you after. Your question might end up as a blog post or a story, or you might get a individual response. So, Jenny, anything to add before we go to our introductions? How excited are you?
Just so excited for this conversation, and thank you everybody for taking the time to learn with us today.
All right, so as Paige said, I am Rebecca Warren. I have been at Eightfold for about 3.5 years now. Prior to that, a practitioner, recruiter sourcer, all the way up to senior leadership at several large restaurant, retail, and CPG organizations. Came into Eightfold, into customer success, helped build up that team, and now have just recently moved to a new team, which we're going to tell you about a little bit later in the presentation. So super excited to be able to chat with you, and I'm going to sling it on over to Jenny to introduce herself.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody there. I'm Jenny, or JCK for short. I am the one tuning in from Minnesota, and I recently joined a couple months ago Eightfold as a director of Talent Center Transformation as well. And so prior to this, I was involved in the big, hairy type changes when it comes to transforming kind of the infrastructure around how we get work done. I've been in roles such as HR director, talent acquisition leader, and really excited to be here and be able to learn alongside all of you today.
All right, so we're going to switch into our first subtopic here, the rise and fail of the resume. Jenny, how did we get here? Where did we get this idea of a resume from? We weren't born knowing what a resume was. How did we get here?
It's true. It's true. So when we started with this topic, I'm a little bit of a history buff. And so I went into research because that's, in order to figure out where we've been, sometimes it's important to go back and research that. And so I looked at how did the resume start and was really surprised that it actually goes back to the 15th century. And the first person who was credited with the resume was actually Leonardo da Vinci, whose picture is shown here. And that was in 1482. And so what Da Vinci had done was he was writing a letter to somebody that he wanted to do business with. And this letter focused on the skills and what was essentially in it for this prospect that he was talking to of what he could bring to the table. And little did he know that that letter would end up becoming or evolving into the model that we all know today. So moving towards, again, so we start with Leonardo da Vinci. We see things that are swinging through like the 15th century with resumes being used. And then moving into modern times, in the mid 20th century, resumes became a standardized part of the process for hiring, especially as it related to white collar jobs. And so as change evolves, right? And so the advent of the personal computer, kind of interesting, kind of looking back there of like not knowing the personal computer wasn't there because it's such a part of our lives today, really took that resume from being a typed out thing into a digital document. And it made it a lot easier to scale, a lot easier to share. And then the first iteration, this is one of my fun things that I threw in there, but the first iteration of an applicant tracking system, or ATS as we know it by short, was actually introduced in the late 1960s by IBM. And so that's, again, where we've kind of been when it relates to this resume. And now, Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you to show kind of the evolution of starting that 1960s. Where did we get to how we are today?
Where are we now? So the rise of the resume. So resumes were amazing because it freed candidates from having to go on site and fill out applications, allowed them to tell their story. They could apply via, okay, I'm dating us all here, right? Or at least myself. They could apply via mail or fax when they responded to newspaper ads. Yes, that really was a thing. And when ATSs came on the scene, it allowed for the growth of recruiting and TA to work with multiple candidates in multiple ways, and hiring managers to be able to do this more easily. So I'm going to give you, so here's a whole bunch of different resume styles, right? They all have their point and place and efficacy. So 5 reasons why resumes are great. They give a career overview. Now, let me say this, it depends on how you create one, but in the best practice, right, the best scenario, they give everyone who looks at it a career overview, right? You get to showcase your specific experience, show your career growth. You get to demonstrate your professionalism and how well you write. You get to move the hiring process along because you've entered into the hiring process. And it's a great networking tool for folks to understand who you are and what you bring to the table. So we could talk 7 different ways of what's the best practice for a resume, how long should it be, all of those things that have now evolved into careers for folks, career coaches, resume coaches, all of that. But the resume itself isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. So when you look at a resume, you've got your education, achievements, experience, skills, hobbies, whatever you choose to put in there, sometimes a picture, which is a whole nother, it could be a day-long debate of should you put your picture on there or not, right? And then you've got a job description. So the job description maybe is talking about certifications, particular things that a hiring manager would like, or maybe something specifically that a payroll provider says, you know, you need to have this in here for compliance reasons, manual needs and requirements, and maybe historical context. I don't know about you, but when I look at these 2 buckets, Jenny, do they look like they fit together? Like I'm not seeing this easily transferable what's on the resume to what's on the job description. Feels like there's some stuff that's missing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important things to note too is the resume, what I think good looks like for a resume based on my lived experiences has been sharpened again from those experiences. And so my model of what good looks like is very different than Rebecca's model. It's very different than Sue's model. It's very different than John's model, right? And so at its core, what candidates are doing is they're attempting to take an educated guess at capturing the skills with the terminology that they think is accurate for being able to highlight what they bring to the table. But as we know, and we'll go into, it's sometimes hard to know if you miss a mark, right? And specifically, we went into there, yes. The other piece of the resume is if I didn't collect the dots, I can't connect the dots. And so making sure, again, if I don't have the right type of language somebody's looking for, like, did I describe it right? I might have that amazing coding language, but somebody told me not to put it in there, right? Or I might have done this other thing and somebody said, oh, just stick to HR. You shouldn't have all these different areas that are in your resume, in your background. And so we don't always get a complete picture, again, of that candidate because it's a subjective measure of a mirror image of who that person is.
And when we talk about, absolutely, when we talk about a resume, my new phrase that I've pulled into my everyday vernacular is a resume is a list of all the things I never want to do again. So a resume is a list of the stuff we've done. That doesn't mean that that's what we want to do. Yet a functional resume really sends people for a loop, and there's all kinds of advice out there of don't use that, your ATS is going to kick it out, it's keyword search, it's this, it's that, right? So there's a lot of things, as you said, Jenny, that miss the mark, right? What's missing? What do we want to do? How do we want to get there? What are we really interested in? What's relevant, right? A resume is a point in time, and you honestly could update it every day, right? You think about, oh, I want to add this, or, oh, somebody said that this keyword would be great. I want to change this. I want to talk about this. And then when you look at what's really happening on an employer side, the job description is more of a compliance list of the things that the organization says are important. We always talk about in TA of writing a job ad instead of using a job description, but it's still a subjective story that we're trying to tell based on what we think the hiring manager wants, based on what we think this job is going to do. And then we try to put these together, right? So we don't see a lot of the stuff that's under the surface, kind of like that iceberg where we see a little bit on the top, but there's a whole bunch underneath that actually talks about what's great about either the role or the person. So resumes have limited depth, they're static, and they're time consuming. Raise your hand if you love putting together a resume. My hand is so far down. We are,
also,
and I
raise your hand if you
at it.
haven't put your name in the hat for a role because of the administrative burden it would take for having to update your resume. I know that's happened to me before, where it's just like, oh, I got tapped with something, and I'm like, oh, the first thing is like, I'd love to have that conversation, but seriously, like, I don't want to update that resume because, again, like,
it's a lot of work.
It's a big work. Yeah.
And who knows if it's right? Who knows if what I put on there is what somebody's looking for, right? It's all guessing. And how many variations of a resume can you have before you say that's enough? And how many times have folks, as recruiters, sent us the wrong resume, like, hey, I'm so excited to work at John Deere. And you're like, yeah, but you're applying to, Cargill. Not great, right? So, Jenny, this is something that you and I are very focused on as well, is how do we reduce bias and discrimination? And resumes can inadvertently reveal personal information or put something in there that could lead to some kind of bias against that person where they're not going to be considered based on something that maybe the person who created it felt was very innocuous. Big problem, right? What about the overemphasis on, go ahead.
The piece that I just wanted to note too, there isn't a cohesive standardization of how we go about this, right? And so you have subjective measures of what we're doing. And I don't know about you, but like, not everybody is taught how to put a resume together, right? Some people learn it in school, some people don't, right? Well, and are they taught the right way? And so when we're looking at like, how do you reduce barriers? How do you include, more different diverse backgrounds? Part of that is like, do we take a look at the container for which we are assessing this human by? Like, is that the most equitable container in order to be able to understand what this person's bringing to the table?
Right, because we're told, hey, put all of the things that you've done on there. So we've got all of these titles and credentials and things that we've done. So maybe puts an overemphasis on those things when they don't really matter. I know when we talk about, hey, I have a degree in this, like when I was recruiting, a lot of times folks didn't care what the degree was, just that they had the degree. It was like, okay, so they've gone to college, which means that they have the stick-to-itiveness to complete something. So are we focused on the right things, right? And then we talked about this a little bit, is those inconsistent styles. Everybody puts together something. You could go to 5 resume coaches right now and end up with 5 completely different versions of a resume. So we don't know what good looks like, right? And then taking that on the flip side, with AI coming on board, there is going to be, I think, a lot of homogenization, and I think resumes are going to potentially all look generic and basically the same when we get down to it. lots of reasons why the resume may be not the best way to move into your new career. Now, it is what it is, right? The resume is something that's always out there. So let's assume that the resume that you put together rocked it and you got to the interview. Yay. Now, I like the graphic for the sweating guy. I'm not necessarily going to spend any time talking about 4 white guys at a table. That's a whole different conversation.
No female. There's no diversity. Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
Yes. But I like the sweating man. So let's assume that you've got through the process. Now you're at the final interview stage being grilled if you've got the training as I did with behavioral-based interviewing questions, which, don't get me wrong, I love me a good behavioral-based interviewing question, taught it, ran through it, love it, but there's some things that are missing, right? It's not necessarily tied to the work that's actually going to be done. You've got people who have different experiences, something that they want that's maybe a little different. So I also am recommending that folks add situational and opinion questions into the interview process because you want to see how somebody thinks, and that was the goal of behavioral-based interviewing, but they may not have that exact experience, but the way that they think about it, the potential, the way that they are talking about it may give you that next step. So instead of being super static on saying we're going to interview one way, I highly recommend that we look at different ways to do things outside of just past behavior predicting future performance. Okay, so you've sweated through the job, you've figured it out, you got there. Yay. Here's what they told you they wanted in the interview process. Hey, you would need to know literally rocket science. Great, I've got rocket science. But guess what we're doing, folks? We're not actually using rocket science. We are maybe falling down a little bit on what the job actually entails. I can't tell you how many times I've been in an organization being in TAHR where somebody has come to me and said, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I was told this job was going to be. So again, you've got this resume, you've got a job description, and you've got a lot of mismatches potentially in the process. Or you've got an aspirational hiring manager who says, we want you to do rocket science. But the work that you got to do today looks like building a bridge with not a lot of tools. So Jenny, talk to me a little bit about what you think about the mismatch that happens now when somebody gets in the organization based on a static resume and a static job description. Do hiring managers really know the work that needs to be done?
Do hiring managers really know the work that needs to be done, or are existing processes able to capture that in a scalable and repeatable way that reduces bias in the process? I think those are 2 different questions. I think sometimes, yes, the hiring managers would know what needs to be done, but we haven't historically had a very scalable way of being able to ask those sharp questions, figure out what is the persona or the type of human that we're looking for this, and then being able to match them to that, right? We've pulled out the file cabinet. We've grabbed the last version of the job description or the job advertisement from the last time we posted the role, and we're putting it up there. And that is casting, right? The goal is candidates are thinking that's the mirror of what's needed, right? And there was a gap there. And then they're trying to put the mirror of what's needed from their assumptions based on that, job advertisement of here's a resume that supports that, right? But we're taking, again, a subjective view and a subjective view and putting them together and wondering why there's misses.
Yeah, right.
It's not a very scientific way of doing it. And when we're talking about the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? This is your physical safety. Do you have a job? Are you able to take care of your family? This is an important thing. And my personal opinion is we should be doing better. What do you think, Anna Rebecca?
Yeah. Well, I think experience isn't a proxy for capability, right? McKinsey states that hiring for skills is 5 times more predictive of job performance than hiring for education, and 2 times more predictive than hiring for work experience. So I think we tried to tie it to something that was tangible and data-driven, but it's just not very scientific, as you said. And we've got digital skills now have a shorter half-life than ever before. In a lot of cases, the technical skills are down to 2.5 years for a half-life. So hiring to a job description from a static resume posts a lot of complications before somebody actually even starts their role. So it adds to a lot of dissatisfaction and disengagement when it feels like all of the pieces aren't working together in the right way. So let's ask the crew online here, talk to us. We're going to ask you to poll for us. What do you think is the top cause for mobility misalignment in your organization? And I know I haven't given you another option or all of the above. So I'm asking you to think about which one do you think is the most challenging for you in your organization? Is it lack of visibility to job openings? Is it employees have limited exposure to decision makers or influencers to even understand what they might be looking for? Is it employee skill gaps without sufficient training? What about talent hoarding for managers? That's a big one that I've seen. Or rigid organizational structures or job classifications, right? You have to start here to get there. You don't just get to go from this specialist to a director. You've got to do the work. You've got to go through the career ladder. Who loves the term career ladder? Oh, wait, I'm putting my hand down. Okay, so we're going to give you a little bit of time to work through what these questions are. There's a lot of things I think that lead to it, and there's probably not a clear answer. So would love just to hear a little bit more about what y'all think. So Jenny, I wanted to ask you a question as folks are doing this poll. What do you think about that skill gap question, right? Like, how do we know what we're missing? How do we even understand what a skill gap might be for a role if we don't have a clear way to understand that? How do I think about my own skill gaps?
Yeah, so I think that comes down to a follow-up question that I would pose for people out there is, do I have a way to assess skills universally across my organization? So not just necessarily the skills for a candidate, but also the skills of my entire employee population. Do I have something outside of an applicant tracking system where somebody's able to collect the dots of the skills they bring to the table so that we can connect to the right talent or opportunity? Because I'm sure you've all heard it before. Oh, we've got an opening. We should look internally within our organization first before we go to post that externally.
But how do we do that?
How do we do that? Especially with remote working being a thing. We don't have those water cooler moments of being able to understand who's on my existing team and the skills that they might not have, or they might have or not have, right? So it ends up resulting in often like the friends and family promotions, which is not equitable. It's not like, Keith Sonderling of the EEOC would claim that that is not the right way to do it. And so I think it's really important. I'm getting a little passionate on this topic, but
that's okay.
That would be
I asked you to jump on the soapbox.
yes. There, I will step off my soapbox for a second.
No, it's right. It's good. And that is on the poll here. It looks like that's the second most common challenge. And the first one is that rigid organizational structure or job classifications. You've got to go through the ladder. So we talked about this, right? Lack of visibility, limited networking, maybe not enough training. Talent hoarding doesn't sound like it's as much of a challenge today, which I'm actually happy to hear because that transparency inside the organization is critical. But then those rigid organizational structures that cause us to get stuck. You can't go from A to C. You have to go from A to B.
I don't know about you. I love the picture with the girl who's like, you're the woman who's like this. And for those of you who might be listening, there's a picture of a woman in a pink shirt, and there are arrows that are going to one side or the other, and then there's a question mark above her head. And I think this is such an important thing when we're talking about, designing systems that work for the humans that we support. And do they know? Like, have we put the mirror in front of them to let them know what skills they have, or also where they want to go or where they could go? Because there's a saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And are we storytelling what somebody could potentially be to the humans that we're looking to support? And I think historically that has not really, it's been the exception versus the rule.
Absolutely agree, which is why, we have a case for change. All right. So, Jenny, we can tag team on this one, but, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that the accelerated pace of change in the workforce today is exponentially quicker than it has been in the past. Like there's a bunch of data that says like, you know, it used to take us 200 years to do something, and then it took us, you know, 2 years, and now it takes us 20 days, right? There are things that are growing faster than we can even comprehend. And when you think about this workforce crisis, you think about revenue that's being lost because we don't have the right people in the right places. You've got folks that are looking for jobs that say there is nothing out there, and you have clients who, or you have employees who, or employers who are saying, we can't find anybody. Like, what's happening? You've got people who want to work, you've got open jobs, and yet we say, until we find the, what are we saying now, purple squirrel, what's the new one, a multicolored unicorn, I don't know what we're calling it today. So you've got people, there's a purple squirrel, right? So you've got employers who are looking for the perfect person. You've got employees who maybe say, I don't really want to do that anymore. There's this big disconnect between what people want, what employers want, and what work actually needs to be done. So before I flip off the slide, any comments or thoughts on this one, Jenny? There's so much to say.
There's so much. I'm like trying to compose my thoughts and like organize them in a second. Because again, I get very passionate on this topic, y'all who are listening in. I think the one piece that I would just share in addition, because all great points, but how often have we heard from the humans who are on our teams that it's easier to leave the organization and find a role within the organization than it is to be able to move up internally or be able to move to a role, right? Like we haven't designed ways that are, I mean, they're very friction filled, right? But like, I just think back to all the different historical clients and customers who have been like that signal of it's easier for my humans to leave the organization and find a job somewhere else than it is for them to find a job with me, right? Within my own organization. Right. And that's often like one of those big like aha moments for HR teams of like, ooh, what are we doing about this, right? Because there's not as many people.
Find the job, feel fulfilled, get that comp increase that they feel like they would get if they went someplace else, all of those things for sure. And so that leads into exactly what you said. We are organized right now for the most part. I would say the majority of organizations are organized around jobs, right? The things that we're looking at, what's the job title, the description, where does it belong, right? The cost center, what department is it tied to? Who is hiring for that position? Where does it live? What's the location? We spent a lot of time building this really complex structure, which is helpful from a compliance perspective, right? We know exactly what this job description looks like, what regulations it has to meet, what certifications it needs, what is required. Do they need a bachelor's degree? Do they need this, blah, blah, blah. But when we look at tying the work to jobs and we start with a job rec, right? How many times have we started with the rec? Like as a recruiter, do you have a rec open? Nope, can't work on it. Not doing a thing. I'm not pipelining anybody because that's a waste of my time because the job may not actually be, you know, real. I don't have a list of the description. I don't know exactly what I'm recruiting for. Nope. Until you have an open rec that somebody's put money behind and said, yes, I actually want to fill it. And still, that's not even a true indication of the role being accurate or open. But until that happens, no, we're not doing it. So we start the process with a rec and then we back into it. So that gives us a very rigid process, right? We're an order taker as opposed to a talent transformation advisor. It turns into how do we get one job out to as many people as possible, which isn't a bad thing, right? Like how do we widen the net, right? All of that. It's decisions then on hiring that are based on that static job description, because we can write the best job ad ever. It's still tied to that job description and that hiring manager's understanding of what the role is. And it really focuses on a particular title or a level. It gets us really stuck. So
it does. And one thing I just wanted to add to that too is our historical, the processes for how we've done work most recently we actually came from the payroll world. So somebody saw the payroll model of we start with this and we end with a check. And they're like, oh, maybe I can apply this to talent acquisition, right? And so early applicant tracking systems were actually based on an iteration of a payroll model where I start with something and I end with something, right? That's a linear process. And so historically, right, because there's a lot of candidates around. So I'm going to open up that requisition and then I'm going to initiate a funnel and I'm going to have candidates that
Narrow
go
my
through that
funnel.
funnel and each of the different steps. And at the end of that, I'm going to eventually have a human that I'm going to hire. But
Theory sounds great.
but that model only works when you have a surplus of candidates, right? So when you get
that
into this
have
war
the
for
things
talent,
that you think you're looking for, correct?
exactly. If we get into this war for talent and we don't have the candidates who are going through that process, we're not often going to get that human at the end of it. And so we've designed it around a not very smart model if we're trying to be, again, like scientific about it.
Yes. And what you said is the war for talent. We've heard about that forever. So we have a war for talent, but yet we're trying to fill jobs. What if we actually focus the war for talent around, I don't know, talent? What if we did that? Crazy. Who'd have thunk that it would be a good idea to focus a position where you need the right talent around the talent? So we're going to introduce this idea, maybe not, rocket science, maybe something that you've heard about before. Maybe we haven't exactly called it this, but we're really focused on talent-centered design here. And so thinking about taking out the standard way of looking at a resume to a job description to a job ad to a very linear interview process. But what if the talent profile, notice I didn't say resume, what if the talent profile is where we start? What if we look at that as the center and focus on the skills, the experience, the things people want to do, their passions, their understanding of what they've done before and what they want to do going forward? What maybe haven't they done that they would absolutely excel at, right? Creating that dynamic understanding of what a human wants, human-centered focus, as opposed to looking at the old way of tying a digital artifact to a digital artifact, right? What if we focused on the human element as opposed to looking at a job?
Well, and again, the reminder that I know when I was coming back into the space after a interesting break, I was looking at the infrastructure for how we solve talent acquisition. And one of the first things that came to mind for me was, this seems all wrong. Jobs don't have skills, humans have skills. Like, how are we 100%. Operating this entire world around the job when it's actually the human who comes to the table with the skills that I'm trying to assess and be able to measure? Like, the back-end infrastructure in itself is not suitable to the outcomes at which we're trying to drive.
Exactly. So we used to, and the way that you described it, exactly right, filtering people to a particular job, or even not even a job, more of a job description, right? We're filtering people to something that we think is the right answer. But what if we switch to aligning the skills to the work that needs to be done? What are the outcomes that the business is trying to get to? A lot of times we talk about TA as being a cost center instead of a revenue generator. 100% disagree, because if we don't find the right people to get to those outcomes, right, we're not doing our job. We absolutely in TA are revenue generating, because we should be looking at not just a resume to put into a job description. We're looking at what are the outcomes that they have to deliver to, and then let's back into that. Let's align the skills to what actually needs to happen. And it might not look like that career ladder. It might not look like you're climbing a particular way of getting there. What if it was about the talent and what somebody wanted to do and said, I don't know that I want to do this 24/7. Maybe I want to do a project. Maybe I want to do a gig. Maybe I want to do some cross-functional work. Maybe I want to move from accounting to marketing. What if we actually focused on what the humans in the organization had the interest and the capacity to do, as opposed to just aligning a one-to-one?
Yeah, because ultimately it's flipping the model to what good looks like for that human, and good is subjective to the individual human you all. Like, it's not like accountant one, accountant one, accountant one, accountant one in my accounting organization. That doesn't give me any understanding of the skills that person brings to the table, because we know they're not one size fits all. Humans are one size fits one. And you need a model that's able to understand that one and where they fit and the skills they bring. And like also the opportunity or the job, looking at that in a different way too, of like, let's put the mirror up to the need, let's put the mirror up to the human, or the mirror up to the human, and then it gives us a much better measure of trying to find that fit, because we're actually looking at what the need is and what the human that can bring to the table to fill that need.
That's right. Having those conversations, being real about what somebody can do and wants to do. There's a saying that I tend to say, that if you hire somebody with 100% of the skills that you're looking for, congratulations, you've hired a consultant who's going to leave within your first 1 to 2 years. You have to give people an opportunity to lean in, and you have to give them something to contribute, right? If you're just going to hire somebody without pouring into them, I don't know, that kind of feels like a consulting gig, which isn't a bad thing, right? And maybe that's where the organization needs to go, saying, hey, I need this. They have to do all the things, hit the ground running, be ready to go right away, right? Like, I don't have time to train. Well, then think about actually bringing in a consultant, as opposed to putting somebody in a full-time gig that they're not going to stick with, right? How do we think about the work that needs to be done and the people who we need to do the work? Because if we're going to...
Absolutely. I was just going to say, pausing one second there to say, as an underlying assumption, isn't it our goal as HR or talent acquisition leaders that when we find that human, bring them into their organization, that they aren't going to stay static, that they're going to learn? That's one of the things that we're assessing in the interview, the critical thinking skills, the behavioral aspects. We're trying to assess, can this person learn and can they grow? But then the systems that we have to organize around that talent do not have the ability to understand how that human learned and grew, right? Which there is a miss there.
And who drives that, right? We say, hey, employees should take control of their own career. But if they don't know how to do that, that's a miss, right? Internally, if somebody's driving to a particular career path, that's a challenge as well. Because if we're going to succeed in looking at this new model, we have to go from job pipelines to those portfolio strategies, right? So if we think about, you were mentioning, here's your accountant one, accountant one, accountant one, accountant one, right? All going on the same path. And I've worked at organizations that have had a fabulous, very linear career path that is time bound, right? Like, you're in an accountant one, and if you're not at an accountant two level within 12 to 18 months, your career's kind of done, right? Like, they'll do everything they can drive you to that next level. But if you don't succeed there, and that happens in consulting organizations too, if you don't get there, then we're going to bounce you out. We're going to we're going to focus on those people that follow that linear path. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it's not so great, right? So how do we move to not just putting people in different places, but looking at those circles that I have? So we've got that grid, kind of looks like a tic-tac-toe board, a little bigger, but how do we find those circles in between those designated roles, whether it's a gig, whether it's a cross-functional project, whether it's a different way of looking at work? How do we get to a portfolio strategy that, again, focuses on the work that needs to be done and the skills that people bring to the table, or the skills that they can learn, their ability to get there? How do we look at a portfolio strategy for work as opposed to a pipeline strategy?
And that's on the talent side, right? And also, I think there's a question in the chat that said, in most companies, they don't focus on the human, rather the algorithm that screens candidates into their software. And many recruiters don't understand the day-to-day job functions of the job or the businesses which they are trying to recruit for, which is a huge issue. One of the pieces of when we're taking that portfolio approach and we're looking at humans who are, again, here we go, future organized around talent. Here's the skills, personas, adjacencies, learnability, work preferences, all of that. On the flip side, we have to do better as HR and talent acquisition to define what good looks like, because again, good is subjective to that individual need. asking the right sharp questions to build out the model for what are we actually looking for? Not the title, right? But actually let's build an actual persona of that skills-based need, so then we can find that right talent. So this is design thinking, it's talent-centered design. It's systematically, scientifically trying to unpack what the need is and then match it with the right type of person.
And what you said, I think, is right. It is TA HR's job to think about that, and it has to be holistic as well, right? You have to get, so if I don't know what they're hiring for, right, like that makes it difficult to hire the right person. So if we were to think about what does the work need to be done, and it's a partnership between HR, talent acquisition, the departments that are hiring. Like if a TA expert became that advisor, that strategic advisor, I'm not saying that they absolutely have to be embedded in the business, but they should be really close to what the business is trying to accomplish. So how do we put that together? Instead of just saying, well, talent, that's HR's job, figure it out. It's not just TA, HR, OD, whatever flavor you want to say. This has to be a holistic way. It's turning upside down the idea of what good looks like for the organization. So it can't just be it's TA's job to find us the right person, and if that person doesn't succeed in the job, oh, it's TA's fault, they didn't understand the role, right? It has to be a company-wide initiative to focus on talent-centered design, to focus on the people and the work, and putting it together in the right way to achieve the outcomes for the business. Because bottom line, I'm not sure any business right there says, we just kind of want to suck. We don't really want to make money. So we'll just kind of do it this way, right? Businesses are created to make money or to generate an output. So what is that output look like? What does success look like? And then how do you find the right people to get to success, as opposed to using a system that says we're going to marry a static thing with a static thing? So we're going to throw out another poll for you here, and would love to hear from you on what you feel your organization is open to when it comes to a talent-centered approach. So are you already on the journey? Are you actively working towards getting to the shift? Are you interested but not actively participating yet? Are you skeptical but learning? Are you like, no, we are so far away from the starting line, not even on the radar? Or, which is fair, we don't know where to start. So where are you in that journey? And so, Jenny, I'm going to flip something to you that we have not talked about. What would you say overall, when all of the research and the time that we spent with lots of different organizations, where do you think the majority of organizations are going to land with this question?
F.
We don't know how to do it.
Well, I think,
sounds great.
So I think one of the things that I've found in my working with customers and clients and research is sometimes we get used to the process being very broken and not being very good, right? And so it's like we're just going to leave good enough. It's just how it is. It's meant to be cumbersome. It's meant to be broken. And I think that not knowing what good could look like, right? But then also not knowing where to start, because so often I'm seeing organizations that have taken these large systems and they've configured them in ways where they can't actually get the data out. So I always say you have to collect the dots in order to connect the dots. And often we have these different silos of data within our HR infrastructure that doesn't allow us to be able to make the right type of intelligent decisions. And I am getting on that soapbox again. So I'm going to pause to see what these responses look like.
Well, so as we wait for a couple more responses to come in, I think you're spot on, right? We don't know where to start. We don't know how to shift it. But there's little things that folks can do to help drive that conversation to more talent-based as opposed to resume-based. Or job-based, I should say. And the question that came in here about how do we shift that in the interview process without doing a personality test? How do we really know what they bring to the table? Are they just good actors? So I will say in my past lives, what I have done to start that shift is to focus on experiential ways of getting things done. So whether that is having folks actually do a bit of a on-the-job preview, like a realistic job preview, what does that look like? Asking different questions, right? Again, that potential. Are they thinking about things the right way? They could be a really good actor. They could be telling you stories. But if you use a combination of behavioral-based opinion questions, as well as those situational questions, and I really like those. We look at that as doing role playing. Some people absolutely hate it. I will tell you, I think it is a huge tool in the toolbox of just saying, what would you do in this situation, right? When we were hiring for dishwashers at a previous company, and we had a hard time saying, we just don't want a warm body. And so we presented a role play to them in the interview process that said, hey, if you had dirty dishes, if you had dirty silverware, and if you had a bunch of serving bowls, what would you choose to wash first? It was great to hear how they thought through it, right? What's the thought process? That helps you sometimes get to that end result. Real time, they can't make it up, right? And even if they do lie about it, then you can ask some other questions on their opinions as well as those behavioral-based questions to help put that whole piece together. So I'm on a soapbox now. I'm going to stop so we can get to the answers of these. But I think so that's just one tiny example of ways that you could shift it to focus more on what the person brings to the table, as opposed to saying, we need a dishwasher who can do X, Y, Z, who can show up. That the only question we ask is, can you work from 9 to 5, right? Okay, so let's do some of these results, and we can absolutely have more conversations about that. Ooh, this is good, right? We've got most folks kind of landing in that upper.
This makes me so excited.
Yes. Well done, folks. There are some things that are on the bottom. I do think that there's, some things that say we're far away from the starting line, but
and to clarify, there is no wrong answer here. This is just us trying to assess, ask the right sharp questions to figure out where people are at so that we can, calibrate our presentation too.
And when they say they're far away from the starting line, guess what? That means there's a starting line. I think that's all a win.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting.
So, Jenny, we're going to wrap up this section and we're going to move into our case study here. But talk to us a little bit about, what does this mean to you? And we don't have to call it mobility maximized, but if we look at that graphic of a whole bunch of different people connected by a whole bunch of different lines, what does this mean to you as we think about that internal mobility?
This to me, whenever I see an image similar to this one, I think, does the organization that I'm working with have an ability to collect the dots to the skills that they have within their organization in order to connect them either to different people or opportunities or, whatever it might be? Do I have a way of being able to assess what good looks like based on historical, successes within my organization? So if I have found candidates or talent from a specific source, and that source has been successful, am I reverse engineering putting more resources to that source in order to go after that right type of talent, right? So when I see that, I'm thinking of a dynamic, operational system to be able to solve these problems.
Very dynamic. So that leads into what we want to share with you is a bit of a case study, a skills success story, a different way to look at work. And so, Jenny, talk us through what we're looking at here when we talk about challenges that the oil and gas industry is facing when it comes to particular positions.
Yeah, so to set the stage for this one, I mean, it's safe to say that historically the oil and gas industry has been a little bit more legacy in thinking about how we solve these problems. Like sometimes said to be stuck in their own way, like we're going from a
narrow definitions.
Process. Yeah, well, and also like we're looking often for candidates who might not have a resume, right? They might not have a fully built out profile, and so we partnered with someone in the oil and gas industry to create a different operating system for how they're looking at talent. And one of the things that ended up doing was being able to uncover skills adjacencies. So, for example, somebody was looking for a well tester, right? And then they were able to see mapped within the data that that could also be drilling, well completion, formation, evaluation, well intervention, and being able to assess not just for the static skills that I have today, but being able to put the mirror up to that human to assess where they are today, but then also to be able to see where they could go, and not just on the organizational side seeing where they could go, but turning that data back to the candidates so that they could see where they could go. Because again, you can't see what you can't be what you can't see. And so being able to collect those dots in different ways in terms of skills, create a better picture or profile of what talent looks like and what success looks like, and what our needs look like and what we're trying to fit, and then being able to design our processes around that. And the outcomes have been substantial, right? Like these are areas where we were told there's not enough people. The people that are there, the skills, just like the talent's not great, right? This allowed the oil and gas industry to be able to screen in people they may
Open
not
up
have looked
that
at
talent
before,
pool.
because
100%.
again, our processes have historically, it's matching, but in order to match, I have to have the dots there to match. So if my candidate doesn't have that specific skill set built out on their LinkedIn profile or in their resume, I don't have anything to match to, right? And so what Eightfold was able to do was able to look at the data as it existed, but then create a better, bigger picture of where that person was and where they could potentially go, and inferred skills,
Right.
and then adjacent skills, because this is a model that's constantly sharpening and architected very differently than we've historically done it. And I mean, the outcomes have been amazing. It's just really exciting. So
Yeah, and two things to add to that. That was great, right? So you're opening up that talent pool. So we are now screening people in as opposed to screening them out. How are we including people in the process instead of saying, oh, you don't fit into this narrow definition? And one of the other things, and I mentioned this already, right? That resume is a list of things I don't want to do again. When you think about, especially in this industry, we were talking about this really briefly, is that folks, a lot of times, if you're in an industry like this, and I think about my dad worked for the railroad, and my dad worked for the railroad, uncles, aunts, cousins, parents all worked for the railroad. So you do what you see. So in a lot of these roles, it's like, well, my dad was a well tester. I'm a well tester. What if you don't know? What does that look like? This is all I've known. When you look at the way that you could say, oh my gosh, I actually could get into this position, I might actually try for a role that I never would have thought of before. And it happens in all things, whether it's a digital worker or down to a position that is a little bit more on the manual side. I think all of those, opening those doors makes such a difference to say, where could I go? And using AI, using a platform like Eightfold to help collect the dots to connect the dots, right? Like, how does it help the story from beginning to end? And how do we include people into what their talent journey could look like, as opposed to excluding them based on a very narrow understanding of what they've done or what they can do? So we're coming into the last few minutes here, so I want to make sure that we get to our takeaways. So we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about 5 things to think about with a skills-based approach. And I'm going to go back to the other slide in just a second. So just high level, Jenny, let's hit these on if you wanted to switch to a skills-based approach, which is that talent-centered design, if you're focusing on the skills that people bring to the table and the skills needed for a role, focusing on less of a static job description, right? So one of the things you can do, and I will say this is not linear as well. You don't have to go from the left side to the right side. You could do any one of these things to move you further along the path. You also could do these things, for the most part, manually, which is an awful lot of work. So we're going to talk about moving, what you could do to shift to that approach, and then we're going to give you a little hint of how using a talent intelligence system, Eightfold, could help you get there. So identifying the skills needed for future job roles, what does that look like, right? What do we not just hire for today? What is that job going to look like in the future? What are the skill sets needed, not a background? What are they going to need to do in order to get there? which does lead into that next one, which is talking about hiring for potential and embrace that continuous learning. We talked about this a little bit, about making sure you hire people that have room for growth, that allow them to feel like they're adding value and they're also receiving value and they're enjoying the work as they go along. Jenny, I'm going to put this one next to you. Talk to us just very briefly about upskilling the existing workforce. What does that look like?
Absolutely. So all of us have people within our organization, right, today that are working for us. And some of those people may be interested in learning different things and growing. Because again, our goal is not to be static. We want to learn and grow and to get to different places. And so do you have a systematic process to upskill your existing workforce, not just looking to go buy talent, but be able to grow the talent from within your organization? Identify who those people are, and then based on skills, identify where they might have those pockets and being able to provide them with the right journey or the right education to be able to get from here to there. And then transition declining roles to new career paths. I know we've had some customers in the past who may have been going through a reduction in force, and by leveraging certain technology, they were able to assess that a big pocket of the workforce they were looking to let go of actually fit a 90% profile to data scientists that they were looking to hire. And so by, again, looking at this differently, looking at our humans and being able to understand what we have and better understanding what we need, being able to connect the dots in different ways that we may not historically have done. And then recalibrating roles with future skills. And so I always think of recalibration as sharpening. So we've got like our model for how it is today, and then we want to sharpen that model based on feedback of what works, what doesn't, what do we, oh, there we go. What do we change? And so recalibration is being able to understand, okay, maybe there's a new skill that's been added to that mix that historically may not have existed. Take generative AI historically, right? I now am going to add this to the persona of who I'm looking for my talent. I want to add that to the model of what good looks like. And so that's, again, that recalibration piece. And all of this is working together. So ultimately, you're taking your processes and you're choosing to begin, and you're constantly iterating based on data, based on performance, sharpening it in order to get it right, which is very, yeah.
Exactly. Moving from that static data that's built around jobs using a dynamic system that learns and grows and continues to develop those insights based on what the talent is bringing to the table and how that connects to your jobs. Absolutely. So we're coming into the last minute or two here. So please connect with us. There's lots of other questions that we can answer. We would love to continue the conversation. Hopefully our QR codes are behaving and doing what they're supposed to. So feel free to connect with us. And what I also wanted to share as you're looking at this slide is we didn't really talk about talent transformation, right? So both JCK and I are in a new practice called talent transformation. And what does that look like? So I'm just going to spend a minute or two letting you know what we're trying to do inside of Eightfold to help drive those conversations with clients, prospects, our sales folks, anyone who will listen to us. We'll talk to anyone about what it means to focus on transforming talent as opposed to looking at that static definition that we've had in the past. So just a real quick overview of what talent-centered transformation is focused on is putting, again, that talent profile at the center rather than jobs, integrating a complete understanding of skills, experiences, and interests, and then creating that dynamic understanding of what people are capable of doing, what they can learn, and what they want to do. So Jenny, give us the summary here. We are
helping people shift the operational model for how they historically found, retained, and grew talent within their organizations. And what we have found is that big, hairy change, it takes a lot. And sometimes you need a guide for that journey. And so this team, the talent transformation team, is intended to come alongside and to be that partner that's helping to identify where are those pockets, where are those things, how do you begin, and being able to also share successes, because success leaves clues. And it's really important because we think, again, the data proves that a shift to a different operating system has a lot of amazing outcomes in the humans and creating more equitable workforces and all sorts of things. But it can be hard and scary. And so having somebody to come alongside of you to help you with that journey is really what we're here to do. And we're so excited to be here with all of you today.
Matching people to opportunities based on skills and potential. All right, Paige, we've sailed in. We've got 10 seconds for you to wrap us up. I'm going to shoot it back on over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for attending today's webinar. You may disconnect and have a great rest of your day.